Today I'm speaking with Ginger. Ginger, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. And you're one of the few people that I've interviewed. He's actually relatively in my neck of the woods. I interview
Yeah.
people that feel like they're much further away usually. Ginger is also in Georgia, like me, but she's further south near Macon. And she grew up in a small Southern Baptist church. And for the past 28 years, she's worked as a professional copywriter in the field of advertising. She plays the guitar, she sings, she writes her own songs, and she plays acoustic gigs at small restaurants and bars. She's also recently spent 8 months building a house out in the country, and she's served as her own general contractor and builder, which is amazing. I used to be a work for a contractor and be a contractor as well, and a cabinet maker, so I know some of the what goes into that. She's a cat enthusiast, and she has three indoor cats along with a bearded dragon, which my kids would absolutely go crazy over if they saw
Oh,
that.
yeah.
And her deconstruction journey began in March of 2019. So that's what I know about you so far. Tell us more about yourself.
Well, the house thing is something I'm really proud of. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever been through. People think building a house is tough, and it is tough. I had to hire out all the subs, things like that, juggle a lot of money, but it went fairly smoothly, all things considered. And I am living right next door to my mom and dad. They still live in the house I grew up in. And I love being out in the country. I feel more at home here than I have anywhere else I've lived. And, this is where I plan to stay
Mm,
forever with my cats and my music. So I'm
that's
pretty
awesome.
happy here.
Well, I don't know much about bearded dragons. What color is it, and how big is it, and how big does it get?
Well, this one I'd had one before, but this one I got as a baby, so it was kind of the size of the little lizards you see out in your yard. But it's going to get probably about a foot and a half long, nose to tail. This one is brown, but it's got some orange. It's called an orange morph, so it's got a little bit of orange. But right now she's sleeping. When the weather gets cold, they do what's called brumating. It's like hibernating for reptiles. So she's been asleep since Thanksgiving. I woke her up, got her to eat some bugs. She went
Mm.
back to sleep. So yeah, they sleep a good bit during the colder months, but the cats are pretty interested in her, but she's not allowed to run free in the house until she's bigger. So yeah.
Yeah, very
But they're
cool.
fun pets to have. They're very low maintenance.
Yeah, we have those little geckos a lot, and my kids just go
Mhm.
crazy trying to chase them and
Yeah.
capture them.
I've always liked lizards and frogs and things like that. Growing up in the country, one of
Yeah,
those things.
for sure, for sure. Well, we're here, of course, to hear your story. So we'd love to, have you take the floor and just kind of tell us how your worldview shaped, and what
Okay.
you were taught in your family and in church, and kind of how it evolved from there.
Well, as you mentioned, I grew up in a small Southern Baptist church. It was like family there. And I actually still have a couple of really close friends. We've known each other since we were babies in the church nursery. We still get together every once in a while. And it was a pretty sheltered, safe upbringing. We went to Sunday school every Sunday. Sometimes Sunday night they would have programs for the kids and Bible school, and we had children's church. So you learn the sanitized versions of all the Bible stories, the Noah's Ark with the cute animals and things like that. So it was pretty typical Southern Baptist church upbringing. And I always felt safe there. I always felt taken care of. You hear a lot of people that go through those church experiences and there's abuse and things like that. But there was none of that to my knowledge. It was just a very safe, sheltered experience for me. So um, I don't recall anyone ever, you know, talking fire and brimstone to us or anything like that. It was just one of those things that's normal and you accept that it's true. Just, like gravity or the sun coming up every day. You didn't question it. It was just the way it was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, and like I said, that's where I made my first friends, and we were. My parents weren't terribly strict about things. We could still watch TV and listen to rock music on the radio, things like that. But it was all just pretty pretty leave it to beaver happy days kind of upbringing in the church.
Hmm.
And as a teenager, we really didn't have a youth group because there weren't a lot of people that age in the church. There was maybe five or six of us. We would go to the youth evangelism conference every year after Christmas, and that's something we look forward to. Yeah, that was just pretty normal. And then through high school, I kind of in high school, I kind of I was goth before goth was a thing. This was the 80s. So I was wearing all the black and painting my fingernails black, wearing a safety pin for an earring. But I was still a really good kid. I didn't, get into the things that a lot of teenagers do, drinking and smoking and things like that. I just looked like the type that back then, the type that would. I know there was a guy that I went to high school with who was convinced I was a Satan worshiper just because of the way I dressed, But like I said, this was the 1980s, so things were kind of different then. But yeah, I mean, that was my upbringing in the church.
In terms of the messaging, what was the message about regarding the actual core message of Christianity? Like, what did it mean for you to get saved, to be a Christian? And was there an age at which you made such a profession?
Well, we were always told, we're all sinners and Jesus died to save us from our sins, so we don't have to go to hell. And I guess I think I was 12 when I was baptized, and I used to go to church camp, the girls' church camp, during the summer. And it seems like that is where I, prayed the prayer of, God, I know I'm a sinner. I accept Jesus as my Savior. Please forgive me of my sins. And then I came home, and walked the aisle to the front of the church and got baptized. And by then, they used to have an outdoor baptismal for this church that was behind an old building. But by the time I got baptized, they'd actually put one in the church. So, and I think maybe I kind of had waited a little bit because I didn't want to get dunked outside in a concrete baptismal pool. But I think it was me and two other people that got baptized at the same time. Everybody's congratulating you and telling you how happy they are for you. So it just reinforces that, hey, this is the right thing. Yeah, I was 12. And of course, I'm sure that there were times where I reprayed the prayer like a lot of us did once we mess up and feel like, oh, I screwed up and now I got to ask for all this forgiveness again and make sure I'm saved. Because I mean, really, how do you gauge whether you were actually saved in that? It's not like you got a certificate from God or something, saying, hey, you're actually saved. So, but another thing about my childhood, I was one of those very well-behaved children that was always praised for being good. And that kind of went along with Christianity, the whole making those in authority happy by being well-behaved. I was the kid that the teachers put between the kids that acted up to keep them separate, and there was always, if anybody gave me a hard time, there was always an adult nearby to stand up for me. And now that I think back about that, that kind of goes a lot of hand in hand with the mindset of Christianity that, if you're well behaved, it pleases God. And if the enemy comes at you, God's going to stand up for you. Like those adults always stood up for me. But then you get a little older and you realize that's not going to always be the case,
That's an interesting insight. I like the way you put that. Seems like that relates to just in general to the idea of how we all are so driven to make our parents happy. Mm-hmm. And, it's like just it's the corollary is there, you make your parents happy, you make your heavenly parent happy, and then everything goes well. Once you were a Christian and really dedicated to Jesus, what were some of the things that you would do to just grow close to Jesus and to worship and, to really deepen that relationship?
Well, I'd buy different Bible study books to use along with reading the Bible. And we had a Sunday school class. It was mostly, by the time I was in high school and college, it was mostly just girls, ladies in this class. And we would get in there, pray for a boyfriend, which, but, I would just, I don't know, I guess throughout my high school and college years, it was more just Bible studies as an addition to the Bible. I didn't really delve deeply into the Bible at that age. And like I said, we would go to different the youth evangelism conference every year, and they would have speakers there that would, have some kind of emotional story to tell, and you'd all end up crying and feeling close to God because of the emotional experience you were having.
When you were just like doing private time with God, devotions or something like whatever you call it, reading the scriptures and kind of singing either, to yourself or in your heart to the Lord and journaling, whatever, did that stuff feel like it was real and like you were deepening your relationship with God? And did you feel like you were hearing him either literally or at least the sense that he's moving in your heart?
Sometimes, and I guess the more emotional I felt at the time, the more I would feel like I was actually connecting and hearing from God, which, looking back now, you realize that, oh, that was just my emotions confirming what I wanted to believe or what I already believed. I guess, my life was fairly easy until the first thing I remember that I felt like I really needed to pray hard for was when I think it was between my junior and senior year of high school. My dad had to have a quadruple bypass, and I was so worried, that he wasn't going to make it. And I remember being at the hospital and crying and praying and writing in my little journal about, please God, don't take my dad, and my dad came through it fine and recovered. And so that just, confirmed to me that prayer worked, because God protected my dad and healed him, and everything worked out great. So, when you're younger and the easier things that you pray for happen, that, kind of strengthens that belief. I remember when I was really young, I would pray that, please God, don't let anything really bad or horrible or awful happen today. And when I get through the day, nothing bad had happened, I'll be like, hey, thanks God. I mean, in general,
Absolutely.
most days, nothing really bad, awful, or terrible or horrible is going to happen. And I remember one time I decided I was going to do an experiment and not pray that prayer one day and see what happened. But of course, I prayed it the night before. Please tomorrow, let everything be fine. And it was, it's just a little, I don't know, the mind of a child, I guess.
Well, it's
Um,
funny. I was gonna say I had a funny thing happen to me when I was a Christian. A friend of a friend is this lady that she and her husband, I guess, played the little lotto tickets you can get in this grocery store for like $10 or $5.
yeah.
And I remember seeing her, and she was a Christian, but very different from, I guess, my version of it, because I was not like into the um, you know, praying to God for every little thing, like, God, please give me a parking spot, this and that.
Yeah.
But she was literally, I'd see her, get the quarter or the nickel, or whatever, and she's rubbing off the little silver thing on top of the lottery ticket to see if she's won. And she starts praying out, dear God, please let me win at least $20. Like, oh no.
Which doesn't really match with the no gambling thing that
It doesn't,
most
yes.
Christians believe.
But I guess if you're gonna
Sure,
go gambling, she's
she would
gonna
have
pray
given
about it.
10% of it to the church, I'm sure.
Exactly, exactly. Mm. So as you're doing these things, and you're going to the youth group stuff and the conferences, you're hearing the pastor preach. Did you feel like there was any sense that you were like that God was giving you a burden for a passion for something you wanted you to do with your life to please him and to honor him, in terms of beyond just praying a prayer today, but like, was there anything that eventually got on your heart to say, God, like, how are you going to use me to make a big difference, to share the gospel, to at least be an example to the world, but to maybe share the gospel as well, and to somehow further your kingdom? Was there anything like that that came into the equation?
I briefly felt like I wanted to go to seminary. I think it was after my second year of college when I went to a 2-year school, 2-year college starting out, and then I needed to decide what I was going to do after that. And I was actually about to fill out an application to go to a seminary. And I think I wanted to go into maybe some kind of psychology, related Christian psychology, something like that. But I never really felt that was confirmed for me to do, so I didn't pursue it. And I just, I always felt like I was supposed to be burdened to spread the gospel. And I don't know, I guess it wasn't so much that I didn't care about people's eternal souls, which, we're told is our responsibility as Christians to make sure nobody goes to hell. But I was more concerned about, the now. What is that guy standing at the end of the exit ramp on the interstate holding a sign? What does he need? Does he have something to eat? Or, my friend whose dad has cancer, how is she going to get through it? More so than, I guess I was more burdened about those things, because I've always been kind of a little more on the shy, reserved side. So just going up to somebody and telling them about God was like not even in the realm of something I would have done. Um, I'm sure I tried to talk to people about it at times, not strangers, but friends, tried to be that example for them. And I did feel a lot of pressure to do that. Um, it's like joining Amway or something where you're pressured to bring other people in. But it just feels like it feels it feels manufactured a lot of times.
Yeah.
It did for me when I was trying to do it.
It always amazed me too how certain personalities just tended people maybe that were more outgoing or that would have
Mhm.
had an easier time being a public speaker, or maybe they were a public speaker. It just seemed to go hand in hand as if they're just this marvelous soul winner when it was actually, I
Yeah.
think, a lot of it's personality difference. And the quiet person that's more reserved and would have a tough time doing that, they weren't necessarily not concerned about people's souls. It's really hard with their personality. And I was
Mhm.
somewhat similar like that, although I did overcome it pretty early on because we had just immense pressure to be doing street evangelism in Philadelphia, in the nearby neighborhoods. With when you were doing all these things and you kind of growing your faith, was your family really kind of growing with you? Were your parents solid Christians?
Yeah, they were. Well, they were pretty solid Christians. They didn't really. When I was really young, we would do a devotional together at night sometimes. But we really didn't talk about it real deeply. I guess growing up, it was just something you did. Like having supper every night. You go to church. It's what we believe. Um, but my parents, they modeled it pretty well. I guess I grew up in a time where if parents had problems, they didn't let their kids know about it. You'd find out things later on when you're an adult that were going on that you had no idea about.
Yeah.
Um, but there, and we went through some tough times when I was growing up. My dad had started a business that was struggling, and my mom wasn't working at the time. So, we went through some tough times, and we thought God provided back then because there was an older lady at the church who was in a wheelchair, and so my mom would help her out with things, and she would buy us groceries and make sure that we had enough money to cover the power bill, things like that, in exchange for my mom helping her run errands and things like that. So and that's, of course, we knew her from church, so it was one of those, hey, here's God providing for us kind of things. Um, and one time too, it was before my mom started working. Money was so tight that we had we had to eat some, like an older aunt had like canned some green beans with pepperoni in them, and that's what we had for lunch one day. And you look at that, oh, God provided. But as I got older, I was like, well, God providing could also be you finding food in a dumpster to eat. I mean, why doesn't God provide something a little bit better than that if he's such a great provider,
Green
Uh,
beans and pepperoni, that's a new one. Wow.
yeah.
Hmm.
I guess maybe it's a Southern thing. I don't know. I've never seen it since then or eaten it since then, but
Yeah. What was the will of God like to you? Did you feel like God was um, clear in his will for you in terms of both big picture and even, daily or weekly things? And was it ever scary to you to think, like, God, I want you to do whatever you want in my life, even if that means you have to crush me for me to get rid of my sin and my selfishness? And did you ever wonder, like, God, why aren't you making, like, I hear my friends say you opened this door for them, that door, I don't see doors opening. Or did you feel like you had to push through some doors and be like, I gotta hope that was you opening the door, but I pushed too? How did you, relate to the will of God concept?
well, we are always told that God has a will for your life and a plan for your life. And so I was like, okay, hit me with it, God. What are we doing? And as far as a career, a spouse, things like that. But I just never really felt like I was getting anything solid and clear as far as what to do. Because at first I thought I wanted to be a school teacher, then I drastically changed that and went into the journalism school and switched colleges a couple of times. And I guess the big thing, at least for young ladies, is the career and the husband thing, that you want to make sure you've got the right one that God's got for you. And um, I never really felt like I was getting some bright light from heaven shining on any particular choice. And a lot of times too, I think we kind of decide what we want subconsciously, and try to wrap God's will around that. And that's probably what I did, because I've actually been divorced twice. As a Christian, I was divorced twice, so that man that God brought me apparently wasn't actually. So um,
Mm.
I just never, and then some circumstances happened where I would felt like I was should have been punished by God, and doors actually opened up effortlessly for me. So that kind of was a little bit confusing too. And I can go into all of that too, how all of that unfolded as we go along with this.
Yeah, that sounds good. I was just curious too, as you mentioned marriage, but could you just define too, for anyone that maybe is not as familiar with the Baptist culture and worldview, what were women's roles like both in the church and in home? Like what were you seen as like the best way to be a godly woman in the realms that you were going to be touching?
Well, of course, we were always taught that the man is the head of the household, the wife is supposed to be submissive to the husband. We weren't really specifically told what that submission is supposed to look like. You let the husband make the decisions. And I grew up in an era where, the wife still cooked the food and did the cleaning, and the man did the yard work and fixed the cars and things like that. So that's kind of what I saw modeled. Of course, my mom ended up having to go to work, and so I know it was hard on her doing all of that, working and managing a home. But that's just kind of what I saw. And so when I went into marriage, that's how I assumed it should be. Um, and the first time I got married, I married someone whose mom took care of him a lot. And so I just kind of stepped into that role, um, and didn't really question it. That was what you did. So.
Hmm. Hard stuff. And I assume that when you're in the church too, that women were not allowed to preach or have a large leadership role there.
No, they could teach Sunday school, but they couldn't, preach or have any kind of major role,
Yeah.
um, other than just teaching Sunday school or playing the piano.
When you were in your time of Christianity, were you ever concerned about those dynamics and the question of why women were put in those roles?
I don't think I ever really questioned it back then.
Yeah.
Just because, like I said, that was the norm, that was normal, and I just accepted it as such.
Yeah. I think I did too. I think I accepted most of it, but I definitely always, looking back, like I'm working on a project right now to talk about like what were the early things in my worldview that didn't make sense, that I can admit even back then they didn't quite make sense, but I just chalked it up to, this is just how it is. This is how it happened in the Bible. This is truth. This is God's wisdom, and his ways are higher than our ways. But they still like kind of made you cringe a little bit, and just, or at least think twice about it. And I remember thinking the Adam and Eve story, like it just always felt like she was kind of set up. She was kind of hyper blamed, and like things always seemed kind of nebulous. Like, you God doesn't want you to have this knowledge, but he puts the tree in there so you can have it. And this woman who's like, presumably a day old or a week old, just, figuring out, how many fingers she's got in her hands. And so she's just learning everything. She's got to make this huge philosophical decision and fight this enemy who's been around for, millennia or billions of years, Satan, in the garden. And she's fighting. It's like sending a toddler to fight against a huge wrestler. It's like it's not really a real match. And
Yeah.
and I always felt like this is kind of weird, but because she fell, she directly gets, you have to be submissive, and now you have to have pain in childbirth. And I always kind of cringe at that thought, and especially like I think is in First Timothy, where it talks about the woman needs to be submissive because she was deceived, like Eve was deceived, and that's directly why she needs to submit. To obviously taking the blame off of man, as if he wasn't supposed to be there protecting her and doing the fighting for her. But it's like, I always felt like she kind of got the raw end of the stick. You know what I mean? Does that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She was set up to fail.
Yeah.
And I don't want to jump too far ahead, but my second husband, um, he really delved into that whole philosophy of the male female dynamics based on the Bible. And
Like he
you know
accepted it.
oh yeah, and he I remember him saying that there was a time when women weren't allowed to vote or make decisions, that the head of the household was supposed to do that. And he kind of seemed like he thought that was a good idea. And
Hmm.
we had some arguments about that. I never really felt triggered, I guess I hate to use that word, by that kind of thing until he and I had those discussions. And then I was like, wait a minute now, I have a brain. I'm pretty smart. I was 12 years older than him. I had more life experience. And, here I felt like he was telling me that I was just a dumb woman because Eve screwed up, and now I was supposed to, let him make all the decisions about everything. All women were supposed. I said, well, what if you had cancer and the doctor there was a female? Would you not take treatment from her? And of course, I forgot what he said about that, but there was a lot of tension between us about that whole view of men and women, and God being the head of man and man being the head of woman. And it still kind of surprises me that we have such a dynamic like that in modern society, even taking Christianity out of the equation, that men are, and I don't really consider myself a feminist or a radical feminist. I don't know. I'm kind of an observer of human nature, I guess. And it just still surprises me that women are subjected to the types of viewpoints we are these days about things. We've come so far in other ways that the thought that women are supposed to be submissive just kind of blows my mind.
And the fact that so many women and men, but especially women, are willing to train the next generation of young women in that, like, it's not just that it's happening, but they're willing to indoctrinate the next generation to repeat it. And the voting thing, I know some people in my circle of, I don't know if I call them friends, but circle of people I know, where I don't know if they would say women shouldn't vote, but they would say a woman should vote the exact same way as her husband for sure.
Yeah.
Like she can't like undo his vote, so to speak. If you vote left, you vote right, you can't do that.
Yeah.
His vote has to count, so you have to vote with him or else just pass it. But I was curious with going back to the core of Christianity, the whole core beliefs, salvation, the cross, the death and resurrection of Christ. Since you believed you were saved and you were free from the punishment for sin that Christ took for you, what did you expect to see in the afterlife? What did you expect to happen when you die immediately, and what did you expect heaven to be like for you?
Well, I always assumed that, absent from the body, present with the Lord. So as soon as I died, I'd be there in heaven. And, the streets of gold and mansions and so forth. I expected all of that. But I always kind of thought, well, I don't really necessarily need a mansion. A nice little house would be fine. I don't need all this great ostentatious stuff when I get there. But really, I guess it wasn't until I was an adult when I really thought about it. And I probably read some book by, I don't know, some theologian or preacher or somebody that talked about the afterlife and how we would have jobs there and different roles that we would play. It would kind of be like living on earth, but without the sin and all the bad stuff. And so I was like, what kind of job do I want? I think I might want to like have a farm or something. And it just I guess I kind of looked at it as just a extension of this life, but without sin, which I'm not really sure how that would even play out.
Yeah.
I guess if you're just a soul without a body, you can't sin. I don't know. I didn't really think about how that would work, but um,
Hmm.
and, we would have complete access to God and Jesus the whole time. And
Did it sound appealing? Like you wanted to go there, I assume?
yeah, it did. And a lot of people will think, oh, that sounds really boring, but I assumed that it was going to be. I thought, well, it has to be better than what we have here, otherwise we wouldn't be looking forward to it. And
Yeah.
so I just thought, hey, can't wait to get there.
And for the opposite side of it, did you kind of fear for any friends or family that might be headed to hell, that you couldn't tell if they were Christians or they clearly weren't Christians?
Yeah, probably. I don't know. I didn't lose sleep at night over it, which sounds terrible, but I was concerned and I would pray for them, that God would change their heart and that they would come to salvation. I remember one time being concerned about my dad, and I don't even remember why I was concerned, but I went by his shop where he was working and had a talk with him. He's like, "Don't worry, I'm saved." And I'm like, "Okay, good." But I guess most of the people that I was really close to, I felt like they were probably saved, my friends, my family. So I guess the further circles that rippled out from me probably had people that weren't, but just all the people like close to me were. So
Yeah.
I just figured, well, if other people aren't saved, then maybe God will put somebody in their life that they're close to that they'll listen to, because I really couldn't be an influence on somebody that didn't really know me that well.
Yeah. Hmm. But you grew up in South Georgia?
In Middle Georgia, yeah.
Gosh, I was going to say then you definitely were in that spot of the country where I think at least in past generations, just almost everybody kind of was a Christian, at least in
Hmm.
name. Yeah, it was very,
Yeah, it's I thought about that, how it's not even necessarily that everyone's a practicing Christian. It's just, like if somebody back in the old days when somebody would say I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat, it didn't mean that they were going to the rallies. They just identified as such. And that's kind of how Christianity has always seemed, that, the people that go to church on Christmas and Easter, they consider themselves Christians. But it's not that they're in the pew every week and in the Bible every night.
yeah.
So,
It was just kind of like a cultural assumption too. Like I remember
mhm.
I used to watch as a kid and even as an adult. I love the Andy Griffith show. You know that one?
Yeah,
And it's every once in a while they'd pop it in that everyone's walking out of church on Sunday before the next scene opens up, and it's just like an assumption. If you're unless you're
hmm,
the town drunk or something, you believe in Jesus, you're going to
yeah,
be in church and
yeah,
doing that thing. Or a lot of old Disney movies would do the same thing. But it is interesting how much of it has changed. But I think it's interesting to how we talk about this a lot, but how the internet, like just back then, like there was nowhere to go to get a different perspective. Even if you went
yeah,
to the library, they might have been very filtered in terms of what books they had. But just the sheer internet itself, like the change that's brought to us is so profound, where you could be in the Bible Belt where there's only Christians around you, even still today, and you can still have access to all kinds of other perspectives. It's
yeah.
amazing how this has changed us all. In terms of your story, I know that you had some things begin to change your perspective as you got older. Can you kind of take us in and take a dive into some of the early seeds as to what began to get you to at least question your faith a little
Sure.
bit?
Um, well, like I said, I've been married twice, been divorced twice. I got married the first time when I was 26, and I struggled with depression a lot when I was in my 20s, and I probably wasn't the easiest person to live with because of that. And so after, I guess it was about 7 years, things kind of unraveled in that marriage, and I had kind of drifted away from my faith at that time. It wasn't really a priority for me, but I remember I asked him if he was leaving me, and he said, "No, I don't know, not right now." And that kind of like snapped me into focus. I just like, oh God, I gotta start praying. And I just went way back in the other direction as far as seeking God and praying. And I'd get up at 5 in the morning to read the Bible and pray. And I was trying to be the submissive wife then and just get out of the way and let God heal my marriage. I didn't hound him. I didn't argue with my husband. I just was going to let God have the glory and heal the marriage, and, just fully expected. And I was following this marriage ministry somewhere in Florida that I found online that was, saying pray scripture with your spouse's name in it and pray about the valley of dry bones and speak to your marriage like it's that valley of dry bones. And was it Ezekiel, I guess? Um, just kind of, now that I look back on it, it just sounds so crazy, the things that they were suggesting. And also fasting. I remember fasting one time for 3 days and praying and fasting for 3 days, and I ended up on the bathroom floor, bawling my eyes out, convinced that I was never even supposed to be born because my dad had been married before and got divorced. And so therefore his marriage to my mom was not legitimate. And that made me a bastard. And God wouldn't help me because I was never supposed to be born. You know, the crazy
Wow.
things that not eating for 3 days and then just the indoctrination of what people are twisting and telling you is true about God and faith. I mean, it really screws your mind up. Um,
So
and
sad.
that went on for 4 months or so, and then he moved out. And I thought, well, this is just a stronger test of my faith. You know, God's just want me to really dig in. And it was, I don't know, probably about 6 months from the time he indicated he might leave to the time he told me he wanted a divorce. And by that time, you know, people were saying, well, if he leaves you, then God's got somebody better for you, you know. Uh, and he did leave, and we did get divorced. And it didn't make sense to me why I prayed so hard for something and had such strong faith and had so many other people praying too that he left. And of course, oh, well, he's got free will. God's not going to infringe on that. Okay. You know, there's always a logic hoop to jump through when something doesn't make sense there. And so I jumped on the God's got somebody better for you train after that. And not long after that, I met the man I would be my second husband. We met on MySpace, of all places, through a Christian band that he was friends with. And he lived 900 miles away. We long distance dated for a year. Then he moved down here and rented a room from an older lady that I worked with. And he was a lot different from my first husband. He was a lot more serious. We actually had a lot of deep conversations about things. He was serious about God and studying theology and things like that. Not that my first husband wasn't, because he was one of those, you know, Christian in name type people, went to church sometimes. But the second one, you know, he was really serious about it. And so that was something that I liked about the relationship and felt like God had brought us together, because the chance of us meeting had been really slim to none, and we did meet. So I thought, okay, well, thank you, God, you brought me this somebody better. But we actually ended up moving in together before we got married, because the lady he was renting from she got married. And so she wanted the house to herself. And so he moved in with me. And we felt really bothered about that because we weren't married, you know, and shacking up's a sin. So I don't know, we just kind of stuffed it down and didn't think about it too much, because what else can you do? You know, constantly walk around feeling guilty, I guess. But we did eventually get married. I guess we got married after we'd known each other for 4 years. And then soon after was when he kind of got into the whole thing about men and women, men being superior, things like that. And that made me kind of question, well, what have I got myself into? You know, was this really what God sent me? Because I felt like early on, I felt like heard God telling me, this man's going to be your husband. And so I was convinced that he was, and we went through some struggles. And then 4 years later, we finally did get married. You know, it's always like whatever God's will was, you had to struggle and strive through it to get there, you know. I've kind of, since leaving it, adopted a philosophy of, if I have to stand outside a door and round the doorknob, it's probably not the door for me.
Exactly. I was
But
curious, do you think with the whole what you were joking about with, you know, shacking up and so forth, do you think that there is a sense for Christians that, like, when you're younger and you're kind of more, you know, innocent, and you've had less opportunity to mess things up in terms of the Christian cultural rules, such as, you know, maybe, you know, people were strong in being staying virgins perhaps during dating, you know, not doing heavy petting kind of stuff, not drinking or whatever, you know, go down the list of things that, you know, your church said, you know, don't do, and you'll be a good person. But I think I'm observing, and I'm curious if you've observed this too, of in my life and other people's, when you kind of start to have something in your life where either you messed up or at least it looked like you messed up, you in some way something tainted your testimony as a Christian. And at that point, I think it's easier to say, well, I'm no longer this precious gem of a diamond to the Lord. I'm not this polished, beautiful stone that's just perfectly pure. I'm now kind of dirty. And it
Mhm.
felt like when you would do that, where you start to feel a little dirty or messed up, that it was easier to do something else then, because you felt like, well,
Right.
it's kind of like it's like taking taking maybe a painting that your kid draws, and it's so beautiful, and then for some reason they just decide, because they're rambunctious, and they just decide to start drawing like scribbles on it, and you're like, okay, well, I was going to frame that, but now it's kind of like you just kind of scribble, and then they start ripping it up. It's like, okay, at this point, your beautiful painting is not worth that much.
Yeah.
It was beautiful 10 minutes ago. That happens a lot. Saying that for my actual experience, but you just feel like you start out as this either pristine or at least potentially pristine person, especially with things like virginity. And if you do some things right and you stay on the right track, and then things fall apart, whether it's your fault or not, you just feel like at this point, I don't really have a shot yet at being a stellar witness anymore. So who the hell
Mhm.
cares if I do a few more bad things? Does
Yeah.
that resonate with you at all?
Oh yeah. And I guess, since I was already divorced, I thought, well, I've already got that strike against me. And it's like I was wearing a big scarlet D on my sweater.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
honestly, I was kind of surprised that I didn't get more backlash about us moving in together, than I did. As far as, my family, they're like, well, I guess you got to do what you got to do, and
Wow.
uh, so, uh, but yeah, I get what you're saying about that. It does kind of feel that way. And it made me think of something, a Bible study that I used to go to. There was this man that got up and he would speak to us about things, and he was divorced. He was a few years older than the rest of us, and his wife had left him. So he was never going to get married or date ever again, because to him, God only recognized that marriage as a covenant marriage. And so,
Wow.
if he dated or married anybody else, he would be committing adultery.
That's so sad.
And I remember him talking to us about sex and about how I remember the word because it came up recently. He'd say, if you have sex with someone before you're married, you're defrauding your future spouse. I'm like, that's just such a, I don't know. I think Christianity teaches it puts sex up on a pedestal. And it's not that sex is not a big deal, but they make it like some kind of holy grail that when you finally get the okay from God to do it, it's supposed to be some kind of a transcendent experience right out of the gate. You wait till you're married, and then finally on the wedding night you get to do it. But when you get there, you're so tired and you've been peopling all day, and you do it, and it's like, oh, okay, well, I didn't hear angels singing, or you know the clouds didn't open and a light shine from heaven on us. And I kind of feel like it's good to tell young people not to do that, not to just go out and sleep around, because it can be hurtful, especially for girls, because they get so emotionally attached from that. But to tell, say that you have to absolutely save this for marriage, and then when you get married, it's going to be this monumental, holy experience. I just feel like it's a disservice. I guess I went off on a tangent there, but that's just something I've thought about.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's very true. It's put on a level too where, like, if you do mess up, you're somehow no longer, like, it's kind of like a door where you've shut the key, you've locked it, and you've thrown away the key. Like, there's no way to go through that door again. And I think
Mhm.
it really decimates people's value, and they just feel like, I
Yeah.
think that's one of the most lovely things about deconversion to me. And I know we're not there yet, but just that you start to remove all those perspectives of, like, your value is based on your virginity. And, like, I
Mhm.
honestly, like, I don't see that in any way anymore. It's just like gone. And it's so cool to be free from that. But when you're in
It
it,
really
it's very
is.
real, very real.
I was watching on Netflix or Amazon the other night the show about the Duggars, shiny happy people, and that somebody was saying that one of the girls was, I don't remember if it was in the Duggar family or some other family in that church, that the girls were told that if you use tampons, you're not a virgin anymore, and God frowns upon. I'm like, oh, come on, just
That's
I
crazy.
want to go rescue these girls out of that lifestyle. Just go snatch them up out of there and bring them into a normal atmosphere. I can't wrap my mind around it.
Yeah, it is very crazy. With with the marriages, breaking down like that, did you feel condemnation from the church, like this is your fault? Were they condemning him like this is his fault? Or was it just like we're just broken, but we got to fix it. Like let's rally around you and fix it no matter who's at fault. How did that kind of land? And was there any sense, even if your church wasn't faulting you, that this was like all on you, that you had somehow failed God by not having successful marriages?
Well, the first divorce, I was going to a larger church and I really didn't know a lot of the people there. And the people that I did know, they were supportive of me because I was on the receiving end of it, and they were praying for me. I did have one person suggest that I try getting pregnant to see if that would keep him. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that, because part of the problem was that he wanted children and I wasn't ready. Or that, if you asked him, he would say that was what it was. But yeah, I really didn't have any sense of blame put on me for that one because it was his decision. I'm not sure what I was kind of surprised that more of the people that we knew who were Christians didn't put more pressure on him to try to make it work out. But as far as I know, nobody really did. They kind of just stayed out of our business. The second divorce was my choice because there was just a lot of things there that were hard to deal with. The first time I was married, I was the one who was depressed and hard to be with. And the second time, he was depressed. And I hated to leave someone who was depressed, but there was just other underlying issues that drove me to that. And so the second one was my choice, but I really wasn't involved in church at the time. So I didn't have a lot of people putting pressure on me. I kind of expected his dad to say something to me, but he didn't. But I guess he was kind of relieved that his son was moving, back home. So they really didn't say anything to me. I felt a lot of guilt, and I remember him asking me the night before we officially, when I had told him my decision, we separated for 3 weeks, and then I came home and said, I do want a divorce. And I remember him asking me, do you still consider yourself a Christian? And I was kind of offended by that, that my choice to get a divorce meant that I wasn't a Christian anymore. And, I told him, of course I do. That's still a part of my life. Um, I just, but like I said, I felt really offended by the question at the time. And I really felt like, well, I'm making God mad and I'm hurting God because God hates divorce. But I have to do this because I felt like I was just dying slowly day by day in that marriage. And I kind of expected my life to fall apart in other ways because I was making a decision that went against God. But I needed to sell the house that I was in at the time because of the divorce, and I needed somewhere to move to. And right at that time, a friend of mine had a rental house that came available. The tenants moved out. He's like, you can move in here. And I was like, okay, great. And I was having to make house payments. And I was like, how am I going to juggle house payments and rent? And the guy that owned the house, he was actually in Afghanistan at the time working. And he said, you know what? I know you're trying to sell your house. Just don't pay rent until your house sells. Then you can start paying rent then. I thought, wow, that is amazing that somebody would offer me that, rent free for however long it takes me to sell my house. And the terms of the divorce were that the house had to sell within a certain amount of time for a certain amount of money, and it did. So that also worked out. And then my friend's like, well, just start paying me rent at the beginning of the year. Just take a couple of months to save some money. And so like just little things like that, little doors opening and things falling into place. And I was like, all right, well, sooner or later, God's gonna do a bazinga on me, and say, gotcha, for divorcing this person I brought you. Um, so I was just kind of like cautiously grateful for those things falling into place. But um,
Like that feeling that God's got to punish you for the divorces
yeah,
occurring.
yeah, and that
Yeah.
that eventually did come. Which is actually what starts my deconversion story is the what
Hmm.
I thought was the gotcha. Soon after my divorce, I started dating someone, a musician, another musician that I had met, and that kind of leads into the deconversion. But do you have any other questions before we get to that part?
Just maybe just a quick question. Did you feel like through all these things that were going on the surface level, did you feel like there was still a deepening relationship with God going on, that there was at least this sense of you were talking to him and he was, telling you, I love you, and no matter what happens in your life, the cross of Christ, the grace that I've shown you through your salvation and the grace that I show you every day, as my child, you're my daughter, you're the daughter of the king, that kind of dynamic of you loving him and getting to know him and him loving you so deeply, and that love changing you and giving you peace. Was that happening on a level, or was it like, was the shakeups that were happening on the surface shaking you up on that spiritual level too?
Yeah, I looked at that the good things that were happening as God showing me grace, saying that there's nothing that I can't forgive. Um, Showing me that, see, even though you initiated this divorce, I still love you and I can still bless you. But even with that feeling, there's still that underlying, okay, is this for real? Is God really, blessing me even though I went against his will and divorced this my husband? So I guess it was kind of a mixed bag of whew and oh no, you know, as far as God's grace went, which is kind
Yeah.
of sad because if you really believe in it, it's like an abusive parent, giving you a gift and you're so grateful that they finally did something nice for you, but they're probably going to beat you later, you know.
Yeah. And that sense, remember those cartoons where there'd be like maybe Tom and Jerry or something, where they make the anvil over the head with the rope. And at some point someone's going to cut the rope and the anvil's going to smash onto
Yeah,
the
yeah.
cat's head. But that sense that there's something above you, or, the dark clouds coming. And I definitely always felt that way. I remember I've described this in other interviews, but I definitely lived my Christian life fully in love with the Lord, fully in love with the Bible, fully in love with my salvation through Christ. And but at the same time, there was this kind of underlying, kind of like a volcano, where you don't, it's not always spouting the lava. Sometimes it's just like hot under the mountain and you don't know it, but it's there and it's just waiting for the right time to pop out. I always felt like the carpet was going to be pulled out from under my feet. But I always saw it as, that's purposeful, because God wants you to have that open hand sense of like, I'm going to put stuff in, I'm going to take
Mm,
stuff out. Your response needs to be, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord. Therefore, I need God. It's not just that I need to be willing to do this, but I need God to hurt me, because when he hurts me, he's breaking me, he's crushing me. And kind of like that, I forget which is it, frankincense or myrrh. Um, but one of those scents where they talk about how when you crush it, it makes a beautiful scent, but it's not till you crush it that the
mm,
beautiful scent is there. And very much the sense of like the gold being refined in the fire, that God has there's dross in the gold, and God can remove it and make you pure gold, but he's going to have to heat your life up a little bit. And so it was like, God's going to get you, but the getting you is actually good. So you need to thank him for,
right,
effectively beating the shit out of you.
right,
But because
yeah.
and I remember, like, one of the things I used to pray for a lot was, I used to, not just me, but a lot of the other guys in Bible college, we'd pray, God, do whatever it takes to make us holy. And
Mm,
the example I always went to was Johnny Arxentada. Do you know her story?
yeah, oh yeah, I remember reading her book when I was a kid.
Okay. Well, if anyone doesn't know her story, she was just jumping into a shallow lake, didn't realize it was so shallow, and smashed her vertebra or something, and ended up being a quadriplegic for the rest of her life. But she, from the Christian perspective, she's a glorious example of how she's taken something that's awful and said, praise the Lord anyway. And I think she would, fully say God had to do this but in doing it, he made my life better than I could have ever been as if I had not been a quadriplegic, which is also sad to think about that she would see it that way. But I saw that as like, I hope I'm not so stupid and thick-headed and selfish and prideful that God has to do that to me. But
Right.
if I am, if I'm secretly that prideful and that wicked, then the right answer should be, God, go ahead, do what you need to do.
Mhm.
I'd rather go into heaven, maimed or whatever, or quadriplegic, than be, in danger of hellfire, or at least be in danger of going to heaven. And when God is passing out his whole, well done, good and faithful servant to you and you and you, he kind of is like, okay, you can go in, but that's all you get. You don't get,
Yeah.
good and faithful.
Yeah.
And the danger of that fear of like, what if I disappoint God? And if he is doing bad things to me, or bad things in quotes to me, to make me holy, they're not actually bad. And it's like the Narnia series, is Aslan's safe? Of course he's not safe, but he's good. And
Hmm.
that was very, very much a dominant perspective for me. But it leaves you feeling like the carpet's going to be pulled out from under your feet at any point, because
Yeah.
God has to refine you.
And when it happens, you better thank him.
Yes, exactly. Or you're going to get more. What's
Yeah.
that saying? Until morale improves, the beatings will continue.
Yeah. Well, I always say that I used to say God gives you the test and then teaches you the lesson. I've changed it to life gives you the test and then teaches the lesson. And you get to take the test as many times as you need to learn it. That was kind of my mentality about God. If you don't humble yourself and learn what he's trying to teach you now, then he's just going to keep beating you over the head with it and till you learn it. And so, as an adult, I did, I'd get up on Saturday mornings, make a pot of coffee and get the Bible or a Bible study book and sit there and read for a couple of hours. And it was a big part of my life. And, when tough times would come, I'll be like, well, haven't I been haven't I been making you happy by studying your word? But I guess I kind of had drifted away from that a little bit after the second divorce because, I was grateful that things were kind of falling into place. But anytime things would get confusing, I would always say, well, I'm not going to split hairs about theology. I'm just going to go to the basic tenet, the basic premise that we're sinners, Jesus died to save us, and that's really all that matters, because theology is one of those things people can just really split hairs about, which is funny because I think I made the comment on the Facebook group the other day that when somebody was talking about that, I said they may as well be arguing about, something to Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. It's all fictional. So, but they're basing their life and arguing with people about it.
Yeah, it is crazy. And some of those discussions get very intense and heated and deep.
Hmm.
So what happened next that kind of took you further down the rabbit hole of deconversion?
Well, like I said, I was dating a musician soon after my divorce, and everything was fine. Um, Neither of us were regular churchgoers. Of course, we both believed in God, but it really wasn't a major part of our lives or our relationship at the time. It was just kind of in the background. Um, but then, let's see, it was in March of 2019. Um, he got sick. He had been playing a gig in Atlanta with someone, and he came back to my house after that. And he was coughing, he was running a fever. And the next day was Sunday, and I tried to get him to go to urgent care, but he didn't. He said, I just got the flu. Go get me some NyQuil. So I did. And the next day, he went back to his house, which is a Monday. And then Tuesday afternoon, his brother called and said, he's in the hospital. You need to come over here. Well, he lived an hour away. So I drove over there, and he had pneumonia, and I was there with his family, and I stayed overnight with him, and he was, cranky but lucid, and I left the next morning um, to go drive back to work an hour away, and he was still fairly lucid, but when I got back that evening, he was just not in his mind anymore. I guess it was lack of oxygen, maybe, but he was just talking out of his mind. Everything had just gone to chaos. And I stayed there that night, and that was a terrible night. They put him on a CPAP. He was combative all night, confused, and that's when I knew things were really serious when it got to that point. So, of course, you start praying and pleading with God to come in and heal him. And they ended up sedating him and putting him on a ventilator. So he was like in a medically induced coma. And so tons of people were praying. He was a fairly accomplished musician on a local scale, but he was in the Georgia Allman Brothers Band Association. That's a big community with people all over the world. And so he had friends all over the world that knew him, and so many people were praying for him and sending well wishes. And, I was trying so hard to have faith, because they say, don't doubt, because God can't work if you doubt. Like it's some kind of test of your faith, whether or not he's going to heal somebody based on whether you doubt. But yeah, there was I remember putting updates on Facebook for people to pray for him. Then an older man came in and, spoke in tongues to pray over him. And we were just fully expecting, God to come through and heal him and use this for God's glory. This would be what would get him back into church and get him to live a healthier lifestyle and things like that. And I remember one day when he was in the hospital, I'd walked outside to cry because I was just overwhelmed. And I went kind of down to a far end of the parking lot where there wasn't a lot of people or anything. And a lady walked all the way over there and told me, she said, he's going to be okay. He just needs time to recover. She said, he just needs a chance to recover. Well, my boyfriend's name was Chance. And so I thought, oh, well, she just used his name that way. So this is God sending me someone to give me a message of hope, that he's going to recover, and this will bolster my faith. And so I went back with renewed faith that God was going to heal him. And after, I think it was 8 days after he went to the hospital, I was at work, and his brother called and said, you need to get over here. It's not looking good. And so I hauled ass over there to the hospital, and we went back into the ICU with him. It was me and his brother and sister-in-law and mom and dad, and we were standing around him, and he breathed his last breath and he was gone. And I remember walking out of the room, and the rest of his family went back into the waiting room, and I went around a corner and I just crumpled onto the floor and started crying. And I think one of his uncles was near me, and I can't even remember exactly what I said about questioning God in that moment. But his uncle said, don't you doubt God. God's still in this. And I just thought, what? And somebody made the comment, well, God did heal him, just not the way we asked. And I thought, how screwed up that is. What did we not say Simon Says? You didn't pray exactly right. So God's like, yep, I healed him by letting him die, and he's now whole in heaven. Just the mental gymnastics that you have that Christianity forces you to do to justify, to make God not look bad when things don't go the way you pray, and that event was what started my questioning, as far as, well, this doesn't make sense. What's going on? We jumped through God's hoops. We prayed. We believed. And also I had one person say, well, you can pray for somebody all you want to, but if they don't want to do it, they have free will. I thought, so we're praying for this person who's in a medically induced coma, and his free will is why he didn't recover. Just all of the things that people said to justify not making God look bad in that moment. Just, it's hurtful,
Yeah. Yeah. Very patronizing. It's amazing the platitudes you hear at those kind of times, and as well as the whole, just explaining it all away somehow. And yeah, it is crazy, and I'm heartbroken for you that you went through that and had to face that. That's really sad.
And I'm sure that I had times of questioning things. I know I had times of questioning things before then, of things not making sense. Well, why if God knew that Adam and Eve were going to sin, why did and blame them for that? Then why did He set them up for that? Why does He blame humans for sin? You know, I had questions and doubt, but I brushed them all under the rug of, well, God's ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts higher than our thoughts. If we don't understand something, it's not that God doesn't make sense; it's that we're not understanding it. You know, but that was just the straw that broke the camel's back of the questioning, because I just could no longer sweep it under that rug anymore. So that's, you know, that was the beginning of my freedom.
Was there any point at that point where you did get sucked back
Oh yeah.
into the sense that this is still God, like they were saying?
Yeah, because there was a brief moment that I thought that my boyfriend passing away was that anvil dropping on my head, that was God punishing me for leaving my husband. That God just waited and let me think everything was fine, and then He's like, "Ha, gotcha," you know. And I remember I actually called my second husband, the one that I had divorced the year before, and said, "Well, God's punishing me for leaving you." And I think I actually sent him a message on Facebook, and he called me. He's like, "That's not what's going on here. God's not punishing you for that." You know, I mean, he was actually level-headed about it, but I was like, "No, God's punishing me for leaving you. I just thought you'd want to know that." You know, I mean, just the screwed up mentality of the abusive mentality of Christianity that makes you think that kind of stuff, you know. But it was just, I guess it wasn't too long. I questioned it the night he passed away, and I kind of came back in with, you know, the whole God's punishing me, this is my punishment thing. But really, I just kind of had to know why things played out the way they did. And I guess I wanted to know what Chance experienced the moment his spirit left his body. You know, you always hear absent from the body, present with the Lord, but I was like, did he see us in the room crying? Was he there? Because you hear near-death experience accounts where people see the folks in the room, and that really wanting to know what he experienced and if he still knew that I loved him. Those two things were what pushed me to explore other aspects of spirituality that opened my mind to leaving that. Because I did actually start, you know, watching a lot of videos about near-death experiences and reading a lot about that, just because I wanted to know, what does the spirit experience? And I took from that all the different accounts I listened to. I took the things that were common to each one and kind of shaped my view then, you know, about people. The spirit sees everyone in the room and feels what they're feeling, things like that. And I actually, about a month after he passed away, talked to a psychic medium, which was something I never would have done when I was so enmeshed in Christianity. Because, you know, we're told in the Bible the story about, what was it, Saul that talked to the medium and
yeah, the witch at Endor.
Yeah, how bad that went. So I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. But I drove up to Atlanta to talk to this woman, and, you know, she told me things that were more comforting to me than any therapy session I'd been to had, you know, after he passed away. But it kind of opened my mind to the possibilities of, well, maybe Christianity is not accurate. Maybe it's not telling us everything. Because, you know, before I just thought, no, this is absolutely true, and all this other stuff is of the enemy, you know, don't even consider it. But yeah, that's what kind of led me out of it.
As you progressed down that road, there's obviously the fear that a lot of us would have, and I think a lot of us did have it for sure in that time frame of, like, what if this is Satan? What if this is me becoming a heretic or an apostate? What if I'm in danger of hell here? Like, you know, there's not much that, you know, the Bible talks about. You're pretty safe in God's hands, but if you're literally going to deny that Jesus is even important anymore, and salvation and, you know, his death and resurrection is kind of irrelevant to your life, you know, you're pretty much as good as a heretic at that point. Even if you're not actually apostatizing, you're just kind of saying, I'm just kind of moving on from this stuff. By virtue of saying Jesus is not that important to my life, you're kind of saying I don't need a savior.
Mhm.
Did you have any fears as you went down that road that there was some really bad choices and that maybe like that whole take your breath away, what am I doing to myself here? Did
Yeah.
that occur at all as you kind
Oh
of
yeah.
went forward?
A little bit. And I remember early on, I would pray, well, if I'm wrong and Christianity is true, please lead me back around to that and be merciful to me for drifting from it.
Yeah.
I prayed that a lot early on, but
Mm.
I never felt like, oh wow, maybe this is true. I just instead I moved further away from it. So I thought, well, oh, and also I had the thought, everybody says once saved, always saved. I thought, well, then I'm good, because if nothing can snatch us out of God's hand, then surely this wouldn't either.
Yeah.
But, the more time went on, the more comfortable I felt with saying, no, this isn't true. This isn't real.
Mm.
So,
Well, dive into that more. What happened after you got past the death part of the story? What took you like fully out of Christianity?
just well, watching people on interviews on your channel helped. There were a few other YouTube channels that I've kind of watched a little bit of. But also, like I said, exploring other forms of spirituality and kind of trying on different ones that not religions necessarily, but I do believe that there's something beyond us. I don't think there's any kind of deity or God involved. Um, I see it more as just a source of love that our spirits are a part of. We come from that, we go back to that. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I would think there's something beyond what we have here. But I don't put a religious name on it. But
Yeah.
I just, those, I did a lot of reading about that kind of stuff. And I did kind of veer a little bit further into, law of attraction kind of stuff for a while because you don't know until you try this stuff whether or not it's going to resonate with you. Um, but I guess the more I learned about other types of spirituality, the less Christianity resonated with me anymore. And the more I saw it as just some kind of bizarre story that doesn't make sense. And I just gradually felt more and more comfortable looking at it that way.
When you did finally get to that point where you were saying this doesn't make sense, when you look back at your beliefs, um, did did you ever have that experience of like, what was I thinking? Like a God who
No,
can't just forgive you, like you can't just say I forgive you. Yeah, why does human sacrifice have to be so critical to this story?
mhm.
And even weird stuff like genital mutilation with circumcision, and the whole blood magic, and
Yeah.
The Lord's table, eat his bread, eat his body and drink his blood. Did any of that stuff kind of weird you out later, or did you?
Oh yeah, all definitely. I look at it, I feel like I'm an alien coming to Earth and just watching civilization because it's just like this is so bizarre that people believe this stuff or that I believed it. And I guess, I just go back to the indoctrination from a young age kind of thing. I was taught that from birth, from people who were taught that from birth, and they were taught it from people, it's just passed on the line that you accept it as real. But now it's like, the Wizard of Oz when they pull the curtain back and you see it's just this little man back there, you can't unsee it. And it just really seems so bizarre now. And I still have a lot of friends who are Christians, so you see things when you scroll through Facebook and, I roll my eyes a lot, I still love these people, but just some of the things that you see and you hear people say, something bad happens and somebody dies and then they, oh, we're praying. I'm like, for what? They're gone. Or a tragedy happens. Well, God is still good. I'm like, it's almost, it seems like an abusive relationship. It's like if a woman's was married to a man who beats her all the time and oh, well, he just beats me because he loves me. He wants me to not dress a certain way because he doesn't want other men looking at me and he wants me to remember that I depend on him for everything. the whole thing about, God lets you do without so you don't forget that he's the one you depend on. That's if a parent did that to their child, the child will be taken away from them, put in a home where they were taken care of. It's just mind blowing the things that people will let God get away with, that I'm like, would you let a human do that? I don't know. But you really can't tell someone that because they've, been indoctrinated and they believe it. And I
Yeah.
did kind of argue with people in the beginning and try to convince people, but I just realized you have to reach a point where you're ready to accept it and to look at it in a different way. You can't. I certainly wouldn't have been receptive to it before my boyfriend passed away, and that caused me to question things. Even though I had doubts and questions before, I still, wouldn't have been willing to entertain the possibility that maybe it wasn't even real.
Yeah. Hmm. When you finally got to the point where you admitted to yourself, I don't think this is real anymore, and you were deconverting, did you get shaken up at all by the idea that maybe you don't go to heaven?
No, I really, I haven't. I don't really think a whole lot about heaven now because I guess I don't really think about hell. That comes with the whole idea of not even worrying about sin. I do feel like, a lot of Christians are so concerned about sin and there's so much fear in their lives about that, about Satan tripping them up all the time. And it's so nice to not live in that kind of mentality anymore. I'm a lot less fearful and a lot more peaceful. Um,
Hmm.
but I don't really feel like I need to dwell on the concept of heaven. Um, I just kind of feel like maybe our spirits come from some source and they go back there once we've passed. And I guess we'll never know. And if we don't and we just cease to exist, then I won't know. So it
Yeah.
won't really bother me. But it is nice to not live in fear anymore. It's such a relief.
Yeah, it is too. I think it's cool too, just to be willing to say that our existence is a bit of a mystery, and there's so many
Mhm.
mysteries in life. And I think that the tendency for us to, as secular people, to try to say everything is just it's all down to science and there's rationality. Like, yes, granted, we don't want to minimize that. It's really important to go down that route firmly, but there are still some pretty cool things and things that just don't appear to have explanations. And it's
Yeah.
like, you don't want to take away the mystery and the wonder of it all. So I totally
Yeah.
agree. I don't think we go anywhere, but I do think there's some pretty amazing and mysterious things going on. I'd be curious, how far humanity will, if we could predict the future and see it, I'd love to see how far humanity gets to survive and just how far we go with
Yeah.
answering some of these harder questions about the universe.
One of my Facebook friends posted something a while back saying about atheists believing everything came from a big bang or some ridiculing that. And I said, and I made the comment, which I usually don't because I just don't want to go there with people. But I commented and said, really, most atheists don't even think about it. They don't really care where the world came from. I said, Christians are the ones who need an answer for that because they need it to back up their belief that God created it all. So, we're just over here happily accepting that things are. We don't have to have an explanation that wraps God around everything,
Yeah.
like they do.
And they'll mock you for saying the Big Bang might be real, but then they'll propose that, the who created it really is a God who likes
Mhm.
to cut off little boys' penises and
Yeah,
likes
yeah.
magic blood. It's crazy.
Hmm.
Well,
Cognitive dissonance.
it is. It's crazy. Well, in the big picture, I'd love to hear kind of how you grounded yourself at that point. The whole question of the trauma, even if it wasn't directly, like you said, from a church issue or some kind of abuse issue, but just the trauma of the lost time of
Mhm.
the thinking God was going to show up and then realizing he didn't show up, but that he didn't show up because he wasn't there. So you're kind of like angry at him, but you're also just like, you can't be angry because he's not even there. It doesn't
Yeah.
exist. So just like the whole, I fooled myself. How did you get through all that and start to get healthy again?
Oh, I've had to deal with a lot of anger. Just at, and I'm not even sure who I'm angry at because the people who taught me this, they didn't know any better. And I didn't know any better. You can't be mad at God because there's not a God. And it's just, I've just had to like vent on the Facebook group, and to a few friends who are, open to listening to it. My boyfriend now, is like, you got to get over this anger. I was like, I will, just let me get it out. So, um, and I have had to learn too about being selective about who I say these things to. And I'll give you an example. There was a news article on Facebook about fewer people professing to be Christians, and dumb me made the comment that on a public forum, well, I'm glad to hear people are thinking for themselves, and people should question this stuff. They may be surprised what they learn. And then I said something about, because I used to be a Christian and I question it, now I'm not. Well, of course, here come the people with the comments. You were never truly a Christian. I got that comment, which on the surface is insulting, because I was really serious about it, for much of my life, by studying the Bible, trying to learn and grow and be near to God. And so it's kind of insulting at first, but then you think, well, nobody really is truly a Christian because it's not even real, you know? And then
Yeah.
another woman, I didn't know her, but she apparently stalked my profile, and I rarely make anything public just because of people like that. But she went back to, when my boyfriend was in the hospital, right before he passed away, and I made a public post updating people on him and saying, y'all, please pray for him. And she commented, well, you didn't have a problem with asking people to pray for your friend, and you say you don't believe this. I'm like, wow, people can be so cruel.
That's so
And I've
sad.
actually only had one friend try to have a conversation with me to reel me back in, because I had said something one time about how it's weird to not pray anymore, because you get so used to praying all the time. And, you really wish you had somebody to ask for help for these things. And, she wanted to talk to me about why she knows that it's true. And I politely, it's like, yeah, I appreciate your concern, but another thing, another adjustment has been, like I said, not praying anymore, just because it just becomes a part of who you are to pray for everything constantly, all the time. And for a long time, I would catch myself still just saying, oh, please, such and such, whatever, please, let me get home safely in this bad weather. I'm like, who am I talking to? Myself, my higher self, or whatever. I don't know. But it's just, it has been an adjustment. And I guess maybe it always will be an adjustment. But and I also kind of recoil from a lot of things that I hear people say. One time I walked over to my mom and dad's, and they were watching this preacher, and he just kept talking about blood. Every other word was the blood of Jesus, and he was emphasizing it like that. I was like, and I said, wow, he sure likes blood. This sounds like a horror movie. And my mom just kind of looked at me and she turned the TV off. And I was like, that was kind of an asshole thing for me to do. But, it just, you recoil from so much stuff, because there's a lot of resentment just on the wasted time, the wasted energy, the wasted guilt that you feel for so many years, knowing that you could have been free from it for so long, and you were willingly putting yourself in a prison.
Yeah. And the fact that was in our culture, at least, it's so domineering and dominating, where you're not really almost given a choice. It's like you just have to assume this. And like you said, I like how you put that illustration of, if you were an alien coming to the planet, and be like, what do you all people believe in? This is crazy. Your beliefs are kind of weird. But you do, the further you get from Christianity, the weirder it seems, and the stranger it is to think of yourself as ever having been in it. And it's very weird. It's like Twilight Zone. Like, I was in that.
Yeah, something that strikes me as interesting too is, when you were a Christian, you had this mindset of everyone's against me. All these atheists are coming at me, and people are against me and trying to silence me. And then when you are on the other side of it, you're like, no, it's completely the opposite. People who don't believe it don't have a voice. We're the ones that are being told to shut up and sit down. Christians get coddled, and a free pass on things, and we're the ones that are told, no, you're wrong, be quiet.
Myth of persecution, that concept.
Yeah. And I know, having been on both sides of it, you can see it. Whereas somebody who never was indoctrinated and never believed it, wouldn't have that insight.
How do you feel you've healed from the whole concept of God's going to get you for, doing bad things? Do you feel like there's a sense in which you're experiencing a lot more freedom in some senses? Just like there's no there's no
Definitely.
cosmic, what would you call it? Camera in the sky looking down at me to say, you're going to make the right choice or the wrong choice, and
Mhm.
I'll get you.
Yeah, definitely. And, people that Christians will say, you just want to be able to sin all the time. Well, of course, like I said, there is no such thing as sin. There are bad choices and hurtful choices. But I feel like I treat people better now than I did when I was a Christian because I'm not judging them. I'm not, even if I didn't judge them to their face or criticize them to their face, I would still look at this person and say, well, they're not living right. And I feel like I'm a much more compassionate, caring person than I was then. Um, when you're a Christian, you're told that homosexuality is wrong, it's a sin. And even then, I kind of felt like, why do I care? If that's how they feel, if a man is attracted to another man, okay, it doesn't bother me. But I was told I was supposed to be against it, so I couldn't be, a supportive of people who made that choice. But now it's like, you know what? If two people love each other and they're consenting adults, do what you want to do.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the big issues of when you're a Christian is homosexuality and abortion. And I'm like, I've never been a pregnant 16-year-old who's panicking. I don't know what choice I would make. I'm not going to condemn or criticize anybody. So it's like, you can be so much more compassionate when you don't have that whole dark cloud hanging over you of you're supposed to judge people. And some Christians even say, well, I'm judging you in love. I'm trying to help you get on the right path. And that's very condescending. And
Yeah.
it's just really nice to not have that expectation of yourself or from others to judge people like that or condemn people or criticize for what they're doing with their lives.
Mm. Agreed 100%. I was going to say too about your comment about not praying anymore eventually. It's really amazing once you realize, not in a joking sense, but like truly just realize I've only ever been talking to myself, and that
Mm-hmm.
you therefore can continue the conversation as it were, because
Yeah.
you've only been talking to yourself the whole time. So just keep talking to yourself if you feel like in terms of
Mm-hmm.
like talking it out,
Yeah. If
stream
it
of stream
calms
of
you down, yeah, it
yeah,
brings,
stream of consciousness kind of stuff. But
because
it's like,
really prayer really only serves to calm you internally anyway, because of the expectation of help.
yeah, yeah, it's a definitely a placebo, but it helps you get through
Mhm.
it sometimes. And but just to
Yeah.
realize like the like in the truest profoundest senses of this, you felt like you were relying on a higher power. You felt like you were relying on a savior, on someone that was going to give you this wisdom. And when you got wisdom or you got a sense of direction, you felt like he was opening the doors. But in reality, it was only ever just you. And so, in
Mhm.
that sense, I don't exactly say you're your own savior, because you don't need to be saved from something, but you are your own higher power in the sense of like you're the one you've been talking to this whole time. You're the one that like when you thought it was the spirit guiding you, it was your own gut. So
Yeah.
learn to listen to your own gut, because that's all you've ever been listening to in reality the whole time. You
And
just
that's
called it
really
something different.
that's really a lot preferable, I think. You don't have to reach outside yourself. And I get it, so many people come to Christianity through things like addiction or abuse because they don't feel like they have anything within themselves that can help them. They feel like they need something outside of themselves to pull them out of whatever they're in. I get that. But it's really very freeing to realize that you don't need anything outside of yourself. And
Yeah.
and I think about my second husband used to watch Kent Hovind. Are you familiar with him?
Oh, painfully so. Yes.
Uh, and how he would mock people for saying, it was like Shirley MacLaine, I think he would mock her for saying, I am God. Well, we're not saying we're the Christian God. We're saying that you have everything you need within you. And it's so disempowering to think that you have to take that out of your hands and give it to some deity that you're at the mercy of, you know. I, it's just so much, it's been so freeing to get away from that.
It's amazing, ironically, that some of that stuff is actually woven into Jesus's words, and especially if you go outside of the canonical gospels, like if you go into the Gospel of Thomas, oh my gosh, that kind of stuff, the kingdom of God is within you.
Mm-hmm.
That's, very much so. It's crazy that there is, if Jesus was a real person in real history, um, and if he said that some of the things that were attributed to him, he was probably more along some of these lines than Christians would ever be willing to
Oh
admit.
yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah,
Crazy.
they probably wouldn't want to listen to him if he just anonymously said these things.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah, they
another thing, though. I know so many people who have left Christianity who still believe in Jesus, and I'm like, I don't know. Maybe he was real, maybe he wasn't. I lean toward he probably wasn't. Um, I don't know that there's enough historical findings to prove his existence. I never felt super close to Jesus anyway. I knew I was supposed to. I remember going to see the Passion of the Christ and bawling my eyes out and trying to feel like Jesus is my best friend. And I never really felt that. So I don't know. I know people who are fortunate enough to not have grown up in Christianity, they take things from the Bible that they see as valuable, but I still have a hard, I still can't because I associate, or they'll reference God as in the universe, not the Christian God. And I still recoil from any of that just because of how damaging it was growing up with that concept of it. So if there is some higher source, I can never call it God. Because to me, God is, Yahweh, the Christian God.
yeah.
And that's not a character I want to have involved in my life anymore.
That aspect of it is one of the weirdest things to me, both in terms of what Christians see, but also in terms of like looking back at yourself. The
Hmm.
idea that I didn't see the psychopathic nature of Yahweh is
Yeah.
very, like, it's a classic case of just like the Stockholm syndrome. I was in
Hmm.
love with my captor. And
Yeah.
the idea, like, if you get children young enough and you call hatred love, you call anger
Hmm.
love, you do this stuff young enough, and that's your worldview. That's just like, that's
Yeah.
how worldviews
It's
get shaped.
sad.
And it's very sad. As you moved on from this, like, how public are you so far? And for those to whom you have been public about it, what has been the response so far?
I'm not super public with it, just because I'm not a very in your face kind of person in general. Um, Occasionally, like I played music at a Halloween party recently, and there was a guy there who I don't even remember how we got into the conversation about it. And I told him, he said something about being a Christian or something and having doubts. And I told him, I said, well, I used to be, and I had doubts, and now I'm not anymore. And we talked a little bit about it. And he actually messaged me on Facebook yesterday saying, I'd kind of like to talk more about that if you have time. If I kind of mention it and somebody asks a question, and I've had that happen a few times, people I didn't really know that well, it'll kind of come up and I'll say, it's okay to question what you believe. And they'll say, well, tell me more. If I feel like they're genuine, I'll talk to them about it. But I just kind of test the waters with people. And so many times I want to tell somebody who's so immersed in it, hey, consider that this is not really real. But I know that, like I said, you can't tell someone that. They have to come to a place where they're open to it. So I'm not super public with it, but if it comes up, I'm not gonna pretend that I'm still a Christian.
Yeah, I agree. It's very shaking to think about for someone that's truly not open to that thought at all. Like, maybe this isn't real, to try
Mhm.
to push it in their face. Like,
Yeah.
you're only going to do more damage. Yeah, I agree, I totally agree. It's got to be something people voluntarily, at their own
Mhm.
pace, approach that topic. But I think at the very least, though, the one thing I do like to do is to, even if we don't want to go down the route of like, I don't think your whole worldview is reality, is just to say, can you admit that the Bible teaches some really nasty things? Just to
Yeah.
start there, and I think that's, and of course, the can you admit that there's exponential with mythology woven into this thing, like
Mhm.
on steroids? And usually those routes kind of get me at least an inroad for a conversation. But yeah, the whole just immediate on blast, your
Yeah.
worldview is just complete, like you're truly living a delusion. I mean, that's the final word of it is you're in a delusion. But you obviously can't start there. They're just not ready.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like nobody teaches children the story of, oh gosh, one of the patriarchs who got somebody pregnant and then she brought his cane to him.
Oh yeah, was it David with I forget which one. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Or the hey, take my virgin daughters and rape them all night. Nobody teaches kids those stories. They can't sanitize those enough, to teach that to kids. But it's in there, and so many people just don't even acknowledge it. They just want to gloss over it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how that works, especially with even not just the individual stories where someone could say, well, God wasn't saying they should have done that. It's just he's just recording what happened. But
Yeah.
there's other cases where God clearly commands horrific stuff where it's like there's no way around this. Like he said, go slaughter babies.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
really? Come on. And you're gonna be
Directly from God.
pro-life. You're pro-life, but
Yeah,
you're slaughtering
right.
babies.
Well, and then I thought too recently about the story of when they were, taking the Ark of the Covenant on the cart, and one of the oxen stumbled, and somebody went to steady it, and God struck them dead. I'm like, what in the world, Explain that in a way that makes that that version of God not look bad,
Yeah. But he's a good father. Oh, it's
Kind of
crazy.
temperamental there.
Yeah. Well, maybe just to wrap us up here as a final question, did you have any words of advice that you would give to someone who's going through this? And I'm obviously, accepting uh, the idea that people might need to be in counseling, of course, that
Yeah.
being an aside. But apart from the need for professional counseling, just in terms of like a lay person's perspective, what would you say would be some words of advice for someone who's just at the tip of this, where they're maybe saying, yeah, I'm definitely agreeing. I can't go back. I've seen too much. I can't unsee what I've seen. The Bible's a bad book. The Yahweh character is psychopathic. I don't know where I'm going to land, but this I can't go back. And they're investigating, they're reading, they're watching videos, but they're still struggling with like, this is crushing me. And I don't know. And if I do this, if I go much further, I'm going to lose my relationship with this person or that person, or at least I'm going to feel like I've just lost myself. Maybe like, I don't know who I am anymore. My relationship with Christ has been everything. It's never been just me. It's been me as a child of God through Christ. And I'm, expecting metaphorically to be his bride someday in heaven. All of a sudden that's never been real. What? And Christianity does break your heart. For someone that's just on the tip of that, where it's just starting to really sting, what would you say to someone in those shoes?
Well, I would say that it's going to get better. It's like a breakup. At first it hurts really bad, but the more you move through the healing, you'll eventually reach a place where you're glad that you left it, where it doesn't hurt anymore. And don't be afraid to question, and don't be afraid of what you might find. So many Christians say, well, I've really examined this, but they haven't examined it without bias. You got to take away your bias and your preconceived looking for the answers that you want. Just be open to finding whatever answers you arrive at. And another important thing is you're definitely not you're not alone. There's so many others of us out there who are going through this. And I know that sounds kind of cliche, but it's true. Despite the fact that Christianity is very loud and in your face, you're not the only person who has questioned this and come to a place of saying, I'm not buying it anymore. And that's okay. You're at the start of freedom, and you're going to love it. So just, look for other people that you can talk to about this. Don't go to Christians, because they're just going to, rehash what you have been told all your life. Again, to kind of compare it to a breakup, it's like leaving a bad relationship and the other person tries to pull you back in by telling you they love you and remember how great it was. Don't, stand firm in your choice to move forward with your life, and just don't give up on, learning more and understanding what you do believe. without the preconceived bias of Christianity.
Yeah, well said. And I think just to piggyback on that too, the idea of like it feels so weird and how do you get past this? It's kind of like I think of it as to carry on this idea of a spouse that's abusive to another spouse, or maybe, you know, say it's a woman and their husband's been giving her black eyes, but maybe she is so wrapped up in this relationship, not just in terms of like this is where I live, but just like I still kind of love him. You know, I still kind of hope that we can work this out and we can get healthy. But like you can imagine for some of those people who have gone through that if they could see 3, 4, 5 years from now where they're in a relationship where they're being honored and respected and their autonomy is important and they're being praised and they're being loved on and affection is always gentle. It's never harsh. It's never abusive. And to think right now, it feels like your world is collapsing and you're being crushed. But in 5 years, you're going to look back and you're almost not even going to remember this. What you're in right now is such a nightmare, but it's your reality. But in 5 years, you're going to be in a bit of a dream world comparatively. It'll be reality, but a dream world compared to the abuse. But you'll be so glad you did it. And you'll be horrified to think, what if I'd stayed in that?
Yeah.
And very similar with Christianity, like you'll look back and think, oh my gosh, like what was I thinking? And it's crazy how your perspective changes. And again, the further you get from it, the more it's like, how in the world did I ever stay in that worldview? I mean, we've only touched on like 2% of the topics we could touch on to elaborate on that.
Because Christianity teaches that you have no worth outside of God. But you have worth without believing in a fictional character that judges you. You have so much more worth. And, you know, once you get beyond the shock to your system of getting out of it, it's the pain, the discomfort now will be worth it later when you arrive at that place.
Yeah. And even arguably the whole concept of worth disappears where it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like there is no such thing as worth. Like you're not worth something. You're not worth something. You're just, worth isn't even part of the equation anymore.
Yeah.
You're just a human enjoying your life. And it's crazy how so much changes. Like I love how, you know, Abraham Piper, John Piper's son, John Piper is one of the preachers. It's just like really heavy into Calvinism, and it's all about the glory of God. His son, or at least one of them, deconverted, Abraham, but he has a TikTok and so forth, and he's done some videos at times where he talks about how they want you so much to talk their language, and like even the questions they ask. I remember one he did, I think a couple months ago, where he said you might get this question from Christians of, you have to like if you want to leave, you obviously have the free will to leave Christianity, but you better explain yourself. Why don't you believe this? And he's like, you realize that that's still part of their system, is that you have to explain yourself. He's like, you don't have to explain anything. You can just walk away. And it's like, even though like same thing with the verbiage of, are you worth something? Like that's part of their verbiage. We can get rid of their verbiage and make new verbiage and make a whole new worldview. It's really amazing.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate you sharing your story. Was there anything else you wanted to add before we wrapped up?
No, I think we covered a good bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. I really appreciate your time today. And I do hope that as you do, get more public, I presume over time, hope it goes well. I hope you're able to really, both maintain relationships, but also to make a significant, respectful difference to people in their thought processes. So it's, I definitely wish you well in that.
Thank you. And I appreciate all that you're doing too.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'll wrap up then by saying we've been speaking with Ginger. Ginger, thank you so much. Great to get to know you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.